injected. Unfortunately, I caused the death of a woman, Shatarka Nubi. I am now behind bars and have been sentenced to 10 years in prison in Florida.
Clues in this missing child case are so disturbing. In 1991, 11-year-old Mike Heimbaugh was living on the Jersey Shore. On November the 25th, 1991, an event took place that would change everything. A fire had broken out near the beach, and little Mark was keen to take a look and explore. After leaving his house to investigate, he was never seen again. Initially, investigators thought that little Mark may have drowned or got stuck somewhere, and a huge search began. Local volunteers, dog units, and helicopters scoured the nearby areas for any sight of the little boy. Then they had an unsettling breakthrough. A fireman found one of Mark's trainers on the beach. His mum started getting excited, thinking that they were close to finding little Mark, but unfortunately that was not the case. Disturbingly, witnesses came forward to say they seen a man talking to Mark. Thomas Buckcavage Jr. was a 57-year-old man that police questioned. He allegedly looked very similar to a sketch of the man seen talking to Mark. Sickeningly, he was actually sentenced to 18 to 36 years in prison after being convicted of SA against young boys. He is still in prison but denies any involvement of the missing little boy. Police are hoping now that AI may be able to help shed some light on the case. I really hope that soon we can get some information that helps provide closure to Mark's family.
I survived a plane crash by eating the corpses of my teammates. Like this video and stay tuned until the end, because my story is amazing. My name is Fernando Parrado, and I've been known to indulge in cannibalistic practices for survival. It's December 1972, the 13th to be precise. As our plane was taking me and my rugby teammates to play a match in Chile, the aircraft, a Uruguayan Air Force plane, suddenly crashed due to pilot error in the Andes Mountains. The right wing was torn off first, opening the fuselage and taking a few passengers with it, before the left wing was ripped off and the plane crashed into a glacier at an altitude of 3,600 meters. Of the 45 passengers on board that day, including staff, only I and 15 others survived, the other 29 having died. We took shelter under the carcass, but food soon ran out. First, we thought of eating the leather straps from the luggages before resolving to eat the pilot's corpse, then that of my friends. Using razor blades and debris from the portholes, we cut up the human flesh, preserved by the cold. Despite the extreme cold and weather conditions, I decided to organize expeditions in search of help. After an arduous 10-day walk, I met an Argentinian farmer. The last survivors were saved, but my story quickly became controversial. At first, none of us told the press. It was only after a conference that we revealed everything. As Christians, the church finally exonerated us from such acts, and Pope Paul VI himself expressed his gratitude, saying we had acted like Christians.
This uncle and nephew were brutally chainsawed on camera because they stole from the cartel. The video that I'm about to explain is extremely brutal and you should not go seeking it. This video shows a uncle and a nephew getting brutally executed by the cartel because they stole from them. The man on the right is the uncle and the man on the left is the nephew. When the video begins, it's just the interrogation. Both men are sitting shirtless against some sort of brick wall. And once the interrogation ends is when the brutality begins, and it's absolutely sickening. The uncle on the right is killed first and he got his head sawed off by a chainsaw, which is a very brutal way to go. There was blood spraying everywhere, even on the nephew. He was then completely decapitated and it happened extremely quickly, this all taking place in a matter of seconds. As I said before, this is a very disturbing way to go, but it was also extremely quick. Especially when most cartels are known for prolonging executions, making them as long and as painful as possible. The killers then move on to the nephew on the left, but instead of decapitating him with a chainsaw, the killer pulls out a hunting knife and uses that. This was way more painful and longer than a chainsaw. It took around 2 minutes to complete, and during it, the victim was alive and conscious the whole time, hearing him struggle and gurgle on his own blood. The noises during this decapitation that you hear are honestly gut-turning. Eventually, the killer does decapitate him and he holds his severed head up to the camera and places it on the victim's torso. And the video then concludes. This video was a message saying that this is what happens if you snitch or steal in the cartel. The uncle's death was much quicker because apparently his nephew was the one who got him involved, and he really had no part. But the nephew's death was way worse because he was way deeper involved into the cartel. So they made it a very slow and painful decapitation for him. Now, the weirdest and strange thing was that these guys were actually pretty brave and strong. They didn't cry nor panic, they just knew what was coming and accepted their fate. Most likely because they've seen this done to many people hundreds of times. Please, I recommend you don't go searching for this video for obvious reasons.
What this man did to a child is hideous, and terrifyingly, he could be free to do it all again. Sasha Marston was a 16-year-old girl living in Blackpool. Like many young girls, she was keen to start earning some money and gain some independence. A man called David Minto, who was 23, contacted her on Facebook. The pair had briefly met on a night out, and David offered her a job. He offered her an induction at his girlfriend's hotel. Sasha obviously felt that things were above board, and the induction actually went fine. He paid her for her time, and she was due to go back a few days later to start working properly. On the 31st of January 2013, she arrived at the Grafton House Hotel. She was obviously eager to start her new job. However, when she arrived, he was armed with a knife. He attacked Sasha from behind, and the attack was so brutal that she received over 100 injuries. David subjected the child to such violence that he even bent the knife. While she was either deceased or dying, he AR'd her. He then callously dumped her body, which he wrapped in a bin liner and carpet underlay, in an alleyway, and he then set fire to try and destroy the evidence. Sasha had to be identified through DNA. Now, Sasha's blood was found on David's clothes, in the hotel, and on the murder weapon. David argued in court that Sasha had had a nosebleed, hence all of the blood in the hotel. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of nosebleeds, and I have never had one that was so horrendous that my blood seeped through floorboards. He also argued that the pair had had consensual intercourse, despite Sasha having a boyfriend at the time and being lured to the hotel under the false pretenses of a job offer. He was found guilty in court and sentenced to 35 years in 2013. Now, this means he may well be free in less than 25 years. However, this was an S-motivated murder of a child. Sasha's family wanted to appeal and get a whole life sentence for this dangerous criminal. They did a bit of research, they watched some documentaries, and they found that the 35-year sentence just wasn't enough. Tragically, they realised that the time had elapsed to enable them to appeal. The current system that we have in the UK states that families only have 28 days to appeal a sentence, and obviously during severe grief and trauma, this just isn't enough. Sasha's family have started a petition to try and change this, which has a January deadline. If we can get 100,000 signatures, the government have to debate it in Parliament. That means if just a quarter of my followers sign the petition, then we could change the law and protect children.
Sentenced to 75 years in prison for the sadistic torture of another woman. That's what the headlines recently read here in Texas about the case of this woman. This is 37-year-old Alicia Calderon. And this story is bizarre. So in 2019, Alicia opened her doors to a 24-year-old woman. The woman who moved in was Simone Valdez-Junkin. Nowadays, she lives in a halfway house, but she recently shared her story of the horrific things she had done to her. So at first, Simone decided to move in with Alicia because she thought Alicia was a friend that would help her. The agreement was that Simone would take care of Alicia's children, she would keep the trailer clean, and she would take care of an elderly woman who lived there as well. All this in exchange for a free place to live. And at first, this arrangement seemed to be going well. That is, until a few months later. First, Alicia took away Simone's phone. She wasn't allowed to contact her friends and family and had no contact with the outside world. Then Alicia started rationing and limiting the food that Simone could eat. And eventually this led to her completely banning her from even leaving the trailer. At one point, Alicia even started locking Simone in the same room with the older woman. But at that point, Simone had lost so much of her body weight because she wasn't being fed or given water that she couldn't even care for her. And in July of 2021, at one point, Alicia caught Simone stealing food from the kitchen. And in response, Alicia literally locked Simone in a dog cage. She then went to the kitchen, heated up some water, and poured boiling water all over Simone's legs. This would happen again a few months later when she got into another argument with Simone, went to the kitchen, poured up some boiling water, and poured it all over Simone's body again, this time burning not only her legs, but her chest and her arms. Eventually, someone else living in this trailer gave Simone access to a phone, and she used the phone to contact her stepfather. So when the stepfather contacted the police, they showed up at the trailer and they found that they had to physically remove stones from doorways to allow Simone to leave the building. Simone had lost about 68 pounds while she was being tortured over that period of 2 years. She had severe burns and injuries all over her body that had not been properly treated. And the elderly woman that was inside of the home was so frail and so malnourished that authorities initially thought she was a dead body. But why would Alicia want to do all of this? Well, authorities found out that Alicia had been cashing the elderly woman's social security checks for years. And this elderly woman had recently received an inheritance, and Alicia had spent over $78,000 of this woman's inheritance. So yeah, she is a very evil woman. I'm so glad she's going to be in prison for 75 years. And since she's about 40 years old, I think that that's going to be her final resting place in her tomb as well. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. And here's some of the evidence that they cite when they talk about this case. So after his initial arrest, Jeffrey Epstein was placed on suicide watch for a number of reasons, even though he was continuously telling prison psychologists, friends, attorneys that he wouldn't do that and he's never considered it. So first of all, let's take a look at this sign. This is a sign that was hanging on or around Jeffrey Epstein's jail cell. No one knows why this question mark is around the mandatory. A newspaper even reached out to the Bureau of Prisons to ask about why there was an underlining question mark here, but they refused to comment. 7:49 on the night before they found Epstein dead in his cell. He's led to his cell and he's placed there. So Epstein had been on suicide watch for weeks at this point, but he had just been taken off suicide watch the day before. The people running the prison, the Bureau of Prison System, they recommended that Jeffrey Epstein needed to have a roommate at all times. Even if he had been taken off of the list, he was still on the list, if you know what I mean. Well, for some reason that night his roommate was not assigned to him, they were removed from the cell, and that left Jeffrey Epstein completely alone in his jail cell. Now remember this sign that said that they have to search his cell and look at Jeffrey Epstein every 30 minutes? Well, that did not happen. Well, it turns out that the two security guards that were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes, Michael Thomas and Tova Noel, did not check on him for over 8 hours. Video surveillance footage literally shows them playing with their phones and sleeping on the job. And keep in mind that Epstein at this point was America's most high-profile criminal. This dude was all over the news. And after all this, these two were charged with falsifying documents and attempting to defraud the federal government. So something that's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way about all this is the security camera footage itself. Now, this is a prison. Every angle should have been being captured at every single moment. You know, anything can happen in prison. And video footage of the security guards exists from that night, but there is no video footage of Epstein's cell block area or his cell door. It's actually been reported that the camera that was shooting the angle down Jeffrey Epstein's cell block area corrupted the night that he took his own life. Of all times for this one specific camera to corrupt and the footage to be lost, it was that night when it happened. And there's a lot more that we're going to get into, but like I said, there's just a lot here that we're going to cover, but this quote really says a lot about what I just told you. So Epstein's taken off suicide watch the day before he kills himself. His roommate is removed from the cell. The cameras on his tier are not working. The guards fell asleep. It seems almost impossible to think all those things could happen in that way. And this is Epstein we're talking about, America's most high-profile prisoner. In fact, the suicide watch observation log, this is the actual document, shows that Epstein was acting pretty normally that day. Which isn't to say that he wasn't deceiving people by saying he didn't want to take his own life when he was secretly trying to get alone time where he could do it, but it's still an interesting side note. In the next TikTok, we're going to get into the really crazy stuff.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. Today we're going to take a look at some of the evidence that may refute the official story. And you can decide for yourself what you think about this whole thing, but let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty crazy. If you want me to do a whole series about Jeffrey Epstein, his life and his crimes, let me know in the comments section below, but today we're talking about his death. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested when he was leaving his private jet. And a little bit over a month later, he was found dead in his jail cell. When Epstein was arrested, this was absolutely national news. Everybody was talking about it. It was such a crazy story because he had so many powerful connections. He had been really good friends with the President of the United States at the time, tech moguls, and loads of other celebrities and politicians from across the planet. So everybody in prison knew that this guy needed to be guarded, right? I mean, he was literally the most high-profile prisoner in America. So this is where the story starts to get a little strange. So according to various prison psychologists that had talked to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison, he said that he didn't want to take his own life. Many times he expressed to these people that he didn't like pain, he was a coward, it was against his religion, and that he would literally never do that to himself. And I know that it is possible that he was manipulating people into thinking that he wouldn't do it just so that he could do it, but it is interesting that he was talking about this all the time. So the mistakes surrounding Epstein's arrest and eventual death started right away. On a prison intake form, he was listed as a black inmate. Obviously, he was white. And it also stated that he had no prior sex offense convictions, even though he was a registered sex offender. Like I said, this is the most high-profile inmate in America, so why would they make these mistakes? There were also multiple phone calls placed by Jeffrey Epstein that were not logged and not recorded by the prison system. They have no real record of who he called or who he talked to, and that is obviously a blatant violation of any prison's policy. For the entire month that he was held in prison, all the psychologists agreed that he may have seemed a little down, but he didn't seem like he was about to take his own life. On the night that Epstein took his own life, he made a social phone call. This phone call was not recorded, it was not logged, like I said, as prison policy states that it should be. And later on, the unit manager asked who Epstein had called, and he said his own mother, which didn't make sense because Epstein's mom died in 2004. In reality, that phone call was placed to his girlfriend at the time, Karina, who was a dentist from New York. There are 3 people that have knowledge of this phone call. None of them have stated that Epstein gave any indication that he was about to take his life. And it's interesting because the New York Times asked the Bureau of Prisons for Epstein's phone logs from prison, and they released them, but that phone call was not on the logs. After this, Epstein was escorted back into his cell at 7:49 p.m. by a guard named Tovin Noel. And it was at this point in the night when the story takes a turn, and all of the controversy really begins. I'm going to cover all the stuff that surrounds his actual death in the next part of this TikTok series, so follow me if you want to hear the stuff from his jail cell that's inconsistent with the official story.
They made this 16-year-old boy dig his own grave before killing him on camera. I really couldn't find much on this besides the video and that the killer was arrested shortly after. But if I had to guess what it was, it's probably some cartel activity, so I'm just going to explain the video. The video is 2 minutes and 11 seconds long, and it was shot in the forest or jungle during the day. As you play the video, it opens up as a POV style with someone pointing a pistol at the victim's head, who is on your screen right now. He is 16 years old. The victim is seen wearing jeans and a red tank top. He doesn't have his hands tied and isn't bounded up at all. After 9 seconds into the video, it jump cuts to the victim digging a hole with some gardening tool. This will be his final resting place. The person filming is still pointing a gun at the victim, and at around 15 seconds into the video, it jump cuts again and shows the victim lying on his back in the grave he just dug for himself. The victim has his arms on his body as he prepares for the worst. Another man then enters the shot with a black hoodie on with the hoodie up to hide his face. He's holding a machete in his right hand, and as the victim is lying in the grave, he strikes him multiple times in the back of the neck, which makes the victim scream out terrifying groans. The victim is not tied up, so he tries to protect himself and puts his hands up as he continues to groan in pain. The killer then proceeds to use the machete in a stabbing type motion, stabbing the side of the victim's neck, which causes horrifying gurgling and heaving type sounds that you will never forget. The killer then starts to stab the victim in the top of his chest and the front of his neck. And again, the victim lets out horrible groaning sounds which continuously change in pitch as he is stabbed. The victim then moves to his side and attempts to cover his neck with his arms, but the killer then starts hacking away like a maniac at the victim's head but ends up hitting his arms and hands, causing extremely deep cuts. The killer then starts hitting the back of the victim's neck again since he can't cover it, and you then hear these horrifying sounds of blade meeting bone. The machete isn't the sharpest either, which makes this 100 times worse for the victim. At this point in the video, somebody behind the camera starts mocking the victim's moans and groans, and just starts making fun of him, which is just horrible. The killer then continues to stab, hack, and slash at the victim as he is still alive trying to protect himself. His arms, neck, chest, and hands are completely covered in deep cuts, and he is drenched in blood. At about 1 minute and 38 seconds into the video, it jump cuts again to a close-up of the victim's body, who is now dead. Nearly decapitated, his head is hanging on by a few strands of skin. The killer then begins cutting through the remaining pieces of flesh, and at this point you can really tell how blunt the blade is. as the killer has difficulty cutting through the skin, which puts into perspective how long and painful it was for the victim. This is such a disturbing case, and luckily the killer was caught shortly after this. I feel so bad for this young man, and I can't believe stuff like this happens. I pray you never go searching for this video because it's so disturbing and it would definitely mess up your mental for weeks.
Would you think that finding a missing person's severed foot meant that they are dead? I was not expecting this case to have so many twists and turns. Melissa Caddick was a 49-year-old woman who grew up in Sydney. Interestingly, Melissa worked as a financial advisor but stated fake qualifications on her CV. In 1998, she was found to have stolen around 2,000 Australian dollars from the company she was working for. She did this by forging her boss's signature and then left voluntarily from the company. She lived a very lavish lifestyle which raised eyebrows among her peers. No one really knew how she could fund the lifestyle she was living. It's alleged that she concocted various stories to explain her wealth to her friends. Her first husband was Tony Caddick from England. The pair had a son together and they moved to Essex in the UK in 2010. Eventually, Melissa got bored of the area and told Tony she was going to Switzerland on a work trip. In actual fact, she had gone to Paris to meet with a man. This man was Anthony Coletti, her hairdresser from Sydney. Tony eventually discovered that the pair were having an affair. After Tony confronted Melissa, she moved back to Sydney with her son in 2012. Again concocting another story, she told her loved ones that she'd split with Tony due to him being abusive, which was not the case. They divorced in 2013 and she married Anthony the same year. Now, between 2012 and 2020, it's believed Melissa was involved in kind of a pyramid scheme. She reportedly gained millions of dollars primarily from her friends and family. She bought luxury cars, properties and clothes. The Australian Federal Police even raided her home on the 11th of November 2020. She was in legal trouble and was being investigated. The day after, she vanished. Her son was 14 at the time and he stated he heard a door shutting at around 5:30 a.m. He said he presumed that his mum was going for a run. However, she had left behind all of her possessions, including her mobile phone, which was obviously very concerning. Despite this, strangely, it took her husband 28 hours to phone police. Now, officers reported that Anthony showed a, quote, composed, relaxed and seemingly uncaring persona, unlike any other person I had taken a missing person report from previously. Frustratingly, the CCTV around the area didn't actually capture the direct area that Melissa had vanished from. Bizarrely, it seemed that Melissa had been fearing for her safety. A friend claimed that Melissa made her write down a 4-letter code that she was instructed to give her brother if she went missing. In another shocking twist, on the 21st of February 2021, a shoe containing a decomposed human foot was discovered washed up on Bondi Beach. The shoe matched the size and the description of the shoes she was seen wearing during the raid of her home. DNA tests confirmed the foot was hers. However, criminologists were very quick to point out the fact that just because her foot was found, it didn't mean she was dead. She may have been captured and had it amputated, or she may have even amputated her foot herself. It could have been a way for her to evade police capture. Now, some people claimed that they believe she may have taken her own life on the day she was vanished. However, an expert report called that into question. By examining barnacle growth on the shoe, they found that it had spent no more than a week in the water. Now remember that the shoe was found with the foot inside in February and she had vanished in November. In December 2022, she was declared legally dead. Her husband still denies having anything to do with her disappearance.
This is the story of psychopathic 13-year-old Paris Bennett and one night that would devastate his family forever. Paris was described by his mother Charity as a loving big brother who doted on his little sister Ella.
This is Paris Bennett reporting live. This is Ella's Bulk reporting live at Ella's Bulkhead. This is the suspect of the dirty diaper. Okay, creating dirty diaper. Ella. Ella Lee Bennett. What do you have to say, Ella?
What nobody realised was that Paris also had an incredibly dark side and was planning something horrific. On February 4th, 2007, Charity left for work and left her 2 children, Paris 13 and Ella 4, in the hands of a babysitter as she had many times before. Only this time was different. This time, Paris had murder on his mind. Paris was an extremely intelligent child, and he'd somehow managed to convince the babysitter that he was perfectly capable of looking after Ella all by himself. So she went home, leaving Paris to carry out his murderous plan. During her shift at work, Charity received a phone call that no mother ever wants to hear. Her daughter Ella had been attacked and murdered at home. Her first reaction was to ask if her son Paris was okay, as she'd assumed somebody must have broken in and killed her daughter. She was told the news that she could never have prepared herself for. Her 13-year-old son Paris had confessed to killing her 4-year-old daughter Ella, and he'd been arrested at the scene. Paris had attacked his little sister with a kitchen knife, stabbing her a total of 17 times. He had then called a friend for 6 minutes and confessed to hurting his sister, before finally calling 911.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. I feel so messed up.
Is she bleeding right now?
No.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yes, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
The operator speaking to Paris immediately instructed him to take Ella, lay her down on the floor, and start CPR. What Paris actually did was walk out into the hallway with the phone and start counting to mimic chest compressions. He had absolutely no intention of saving his little sister's life. When paramedics arrived, they found Ella still laying on her side in bed, and it was evident that nothing had been done to save her. Paris was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. On speaking to Paris, officers discovered that he hadn't carried out his whole plan that night. He'd actually planned to kill Ella and then wait for Charity to arrive home from work, and once she'd found Ella's body, he'd planned on killing her too. Paris admitted to police that killing Ella had been far more difficult than he predicted, so he couldn't go through with killing a fully grown adult. Instead, he'd decided to hurt his mother in the worst way possible, taking both of her children away, one dead and one in prison. In a 2020 interview, and with his mum Charity listening in, Paris explains exactly why he killed his little sister Ella.
For many, many years, there was just this hot, flaming ball of wrath in the pit of my stomach, and it was directed at my mother. And one of the reasons why I chose to kill my sister and not someone else is because I knew that by doing so I could hurt my mother in the worst possible way. Because I had always known as a child that the most devastating thing to my mother would be the loss of one of her children, and I found a way to take away both her children in one fell swoop.
Paris is currently serving out his 40-year sentence at the Ferguson Unit Texas State Prison. He's currently 28 and is eligible for parole in just 4 years' time, although it's unlikely he'll be released before his sentence is up in 2047, when he'll be aged 52. Paris's mum, Charity Bennett, went on to have another son and visits Paris regularly in prison. She says she can't turn her back on him despite taking her young daughter's life.